It's my day off. You're welcome.
Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. How are the two of you doing? Back at it after our second time after our summer layoff. What's going on?
Oh, just working a new job.
Any stories to share? Any stories to share, Sarah?
I mean, I'll just say that our first Sunday dinner, I cleaned up and thought that I was going to leave this church kitchen super clean as I had promised all the church staff. Was like, yeah, real...
You won't even know I was there.
Real woke white lady about it. You know, like, we're going to keep a clean kitchen, this whole thing. And then put all of this ground meat down the disposal, and it all came out the bottom. And I made a meat water floor in their kitchen, and then left it because I actually couldn't find a janitor bucket and wouldn't know how to work it if I did. Also, I don't call Hans, so I'm basically doing the Lord's work right now, you guys.
Welcome to your new job, my dear. Welcome.
The staff was so sweet about it, and I felt like such an asshat. So anyway, I'm kicking it off. I mean, it's just like the gospel. So yeah.
Boom.
How are you,
RJ?
It's been kind of a rough week, to be totally honest. First of all, Houston traffic, first week of school, it took me 40 minutes to get my son 3 miles, and it's like 3 days in a row, and he's been late every day, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then our 2-year-old is in full 2-year-old mode, screaming, hitting, throwing things, which is awesome. So I'm a little worn out. I'm looking forward to a long weekend, so that's good. And plus, it just continues to be oppressively hot in Houston to the point you just don't even want to go outside or even think about it. So #real talk. That's fine. But I'm glad to see your smiling faces through the miracle of the internet.
Well,
Dave,
I'm back.
how are you?
Dave, how are you doing?
Thank you for asking, as always. I'm just back from South Jersey, where I got to visit with friends of ours at Holy Trinity, Winona. Big shout out to Ben and Ashley Madison. They had a really, really fun time there. It's amazing. You can drive, 4 hours from here in Virginia, and you're really in
a whole different world.
A whole different world. I mean, it really feels like the North all of a sudden. And they, like, the way that they talk about Virginia, it's as though I'm driving up from Alabama.
Right.
But you're like, hey, guys, it's not that far. Anyway, speaking of meat water cocktails and RJ needing to maybe kick back this weekend, let's talk about White Claw. White Claw is a type of hard seltzer. Now, this is, again...
you don't have to tell me what it is.
Okay, I don't have to tell you what it is. I did not know what it is. And
oh my God, you
Sarah's
don't know
holding
what
a
White
can
Claw
right
is?
now. I've never heard of White Claw. I'm so old.
White Claw is hard seltzer,
Or classy,
everyone.
like...
White Claw was the beverage of choice, just as CBD oil was the sort of, I guess, essential oil of choice this summer. White Claw was the beverage of choice, and there's a ton of memes that have come up about it. It's a type of hard seltzer that's exactly what it sounds like. It's fizzy water in a can with a pinch of sugar, a dash of fruit flavor, and roughly the same amount of alcohol as a light beer. It's cold, drinkable, and doesn't taste like much. Now, Amanda Mull, writing in The Atlantic, she's kind of quickly becoming one of our favorites here on the podcast. She wrote a article about the White Claw phenomenon. And the title is "White Claw is what happens when being cool becomes exhausting." And this is what she says. She says there's a viral joke about the hard seltzer White Claws, and that's "ain't no laws when you're drinking claws." And the phrase has been emblazoned on shirts, koozies, and flags since it emerged from YouTube.
It's the official drink of Mockingbird. It's the antinomian alcoholic.
I mean, it kind of is.
Look for it at our 2020 conferences. And those are only the most popular in the litany of White Claw-centric memes that have popped up as claws themselves have made their way into the hands of beachgoers and cookout attendees across America. If all this enthusiasm for getting absolutely twisted on a lightly flavored, low-alcohol grocery store beverage sounds sort of lame to you, you're not wrong, but you've missed the point. A major factor in hard seltzer's current popularity is what it's not. It's not difficult or aspirational. Being a cool young drinker has had a lot of arbitrary rules in the past decade. For much of the 2010s, booze trends have centered around limited edition, high-alcohol craft beers and booze-heavy, professionally assembled cocktails. These trends have demanded that young people learn the ins and outs of booze culture, have a willingness to pursue the stores, bars, and breweries that meet their very particular tastes, and have the ability to spend some money to try new things. To get the full experience, those drinks also have to be aesthetically pleasing, all the better to document on Instagram to show off your generationally and socioeconomically appropriate good taste. White Claw's appeal, meanwhile, is that it rejects standards. It neatly satisfies young consumers' desires for affordable, convenient, portable, low-calorie, healthy-seeming alcohol options. It's the perfect drink for people exhausted by rules. 20-somethings have lived much of their adult life under the aesthetic tyranny of Instagram-determined good taste. After craft cocktails, funky IPAs, and attempts to acquire an affinity for whiskey neat, maybe nothing tastes better than giving up. Pretty cool. I thought it was I haven't, as a man who's not had a White Claw yet, I do know this sort of the 1890s, everything is a craft. Like, you kind of get why the trends are sort of moving back. But I'd like to hear more from the two of you about, exhaustion, alcohol.
I feel like I need to say alcohol is not healthy. Like, that's just like when we have like a thing about like, this is a healthier option. It's not healthy. Yeah. So I've had White Claw. We had some this summer. Honestly, it doesn't taste very good. I think her description of the taste is pretty like accurate. But it is really easy. Like, cause it kind of feels like a drink that's already made and it doesn't taste good, but it doesn't taste bad. And so if you want something cold that's like not going to make you feel like, I sort of hate the whole whiskey thing just because I'm such a lightweight that like I'm giving away family secrets 15 minutes into the drink. You know what I mean? So like this is like a nice way to like have a drink, be social.
You don't need a drink. You don't need a drink to give away family secrets.
It's true. I don't. I just need coffee, and then I'm like, hey, want to know everything? But yeah. I thought this was funny. I do wonder about. Yeah, I don't know. I'm in a weird place with alcohol right now, so I'm not sure I'm like the best person to talk about this. These things kind of freak me out a little bit, to be honest with you. It makes alcohol so easy that you kind of forget it's alcohol. So like initially when I was looking at the article and it's like no laws, I was like, I wonder if like suburban moms are just like carrying this around like it's seltzer. Like I kind of wondered if that's what the article was going to be about because they make it so unalcohol that you forget it's alcohol on some level. I don't know. Part of the thing I have to navigate is I feel like culturally we're in this moment where like, and I live in suburbia where alcohol is just so free flowing in a way that I think is destructive. And we're not really acknowledging it. So these drinks, while I've had them socially and stuff, so I don't want to make anybody feel bad. Like I think they're kind of dangerous. I feel like such a mammal for saying that, but I kind of do. So
I go back and forth on that, Sarah. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Like alcohol does flow unbelievably freely, and yet apparently people who've like studied these things historically, like we drink a lot less than people used to. And even I remember someone saying that like when John Calvin became whatever Lord Protector of Geneva, like part of his contract was I think like 500 barrels of wine a year for his personal use. So, and Luther used to give lectures with like steins of beer, and maybe that's because you couldn't drink
we have clean water.
without getting dysentery. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. I mean, alcohol is definitely is a thing. This article just made me feel old because I've never heard of White Claw. I did ask my wife because, like, sort of vodka soda, mainly soda water with like just a drop of vodka on top has been her drink of choice for about a decade now. So I was like, we should have gotten on this trend sooner. But I asked her,
Right.
and she's like, what is that? I told her, she's like, oh, that sounds like Zima. Is that like Zima kind of? Or like, or PBR or Bartles and James. Like, is this
Yeah.
really that new of a thing?
Right.
Just like budget looking, sweet tasting, low class alcoholic drinks, which will, don't really taste like alcohol. But I mean, it doesn't seem like that new of a thing.
But you do get the sort of like poking fun at the fact that everyone the continual cycle of trend and rebellion,
anti-trend,
and
trend and
anti-trend,
Yeah.
and especially here, where one of the ways in which authenticity was, I think, lauded as this great virtue for a long time was that the only things that were worth drinking or eating were things that took extremely long to prepare, were really intricate, and utilized like really old world methods. And so all of a sudden people are just after something that's easy because life is tough and they're just
Life is too
exhausted
hard.
by all that. And you're seeing it sort of with the last week in the Weekender, there's an article about influencers, like people that you follow on Instagram to know what not to do, like everything is like hate watching almost. Like if they like it, I will definitely not have it. I'm also thinking the White Claw thing and the marketing around it reminded me of that picture someone sent me last week, sort of under the banner of seculosity of a Qualtrics conference. Like it looks like a Apple keynote or something, and some guys walking around the stage and it says, "Turn customers into fanatics, products into obsessions, employees into ambassadors, and brands into religions." Products being obsessions, memification. I mean, I'm sure it's done great things for their stock.
I mean, White Claw better make their money now because 6 months from now, it'll be on super sale.
It's going to be Brown Claw 6 months
Like
from now.
LaCroix sales are down apparently 60% or something this year. Like
What?
Oh yeah, they're no one's buying LaCroix anymore. So like when
Y'all
something is
gotta
this
buy some
faddish,
LaCroix. I'm gonna need that for my lifetime.
Well, Costco's version is like a lot of better. It's just as good and it's a lot cheaper, right?
yeah,
Costco's a sponsor, guys, so we have to say that.
that's right.
Well, on from I guess recreational drinking into recreational sports. We're talking about football. This first
Yes,
time.
sports.
I don't know if we've ever talked about sports in a serious way on this podcast, but here we go because so many people sent this along. The story of Andrew Luck, who is the quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, who decided to retire from football and walk away from a $60 million contract just before turning 30 years old. And in the Washington Post, John Feinstein wrote that in 40 years as a reporter, he says, "I can't begin to count the number of athletes I've asked what they plan on doing when their playing days are over. Most of the time, the answers are remarkably similar. Coach, get a job in TV or radio, or become a scout." When I asked Luck the routine question in 2018, he smiled almost sheepishly, said, "Honestly, I think I could be very happy teaching high school history." That is an answer I've never gotten before or since. Luck says, "I love being a football player, but it isn't my identity and never has been. It's no mere coincidence that no active NFL player has criticized or questioned his decision to step away. But the crowd in Indianapolis booed him after the announcement was made." Feinstein wrote that those who booed Luck on Saturday cannot understand how painful it is to play football, physically painful. Because NFL players are paid so well, many fans feel like they're owed a willingness to sacrifice body and soul. But this leads into the real article here about it called "Football Doesn't Let You Leave" by Nate Jackson on Deadspin. And he was used to play for the Broncos. This is what he says. He says, "When you make it to the NFL, people tell you that you're living the dream. They tell you how lucky you are. They tell you it's a good thing you don't have to get a real job like they had to because their lives suck and yours is awesome. When people constantly tell you how great you have it, it's hard to do anything but nod and agree, even when you feel something else entirely. What had I done wrong? Because if I was so unhappy while living the dream, I must have done something wrong, right? Once I put on the pads," Nate writes, "like all football players, I became a prisoner of my success, a slave to my toughness. I wore that badge with pride and had no qualms about where it was taking me. But then my body started to fail me, injury after injury, disappointment after disappointment. No matter how rough things got, though, I always worked my way back, never wanting an injury to define me, never wanting weakness to be my final act. That's the pact you make when you put on that helmet. That's what grandpa expected. That's what dad expects, and what all of your coaches and friends and neighbor expect. That kid who told you you'd never make it, that coach who cut you in college, the reporter who said you weren't worth the damn. You'll show them all. You'll have the last laugh.
Football season. So I thought of Chad Bird, actually the moment I heard this story. Chad's a guy we love. He's a theologian and pastor and once professor in the Lutheran tradition who had an affair. Frankly, he wrote about it. I'm not giving away his business. And everything shifted in his life very dramatically. And he writes incredible theology now and is a pastor to so many people. But his work is that he drives an 18-wheeler. And we had the opportunity to spend some time with him. My family did. And it was it was such a weird moment of relief for my husband and I to know that, I say this carefully. I mean, we love our work, but you can be so bound up in the identity of being a priest, being a pastor, being clergy, that you forget that that's not actually who you are at the end of the day. And I think people, I hate to compare clergy to football players because obviously that's how much I know about football. But I think in the same way that there's this sense that you can't leave this job, that this is some sort of, if you're good at, God's called you to this, and that kind of, it has a similar weightiness to it.
And you take a lot of hits.
And you take a lot of, it's a brutal job,
a lot of transference.
And people don't see that part of it actually. And I think while we do see it on the football field, we don't necessarily, and we're just now sort of realizing the physical nature of football and having to own how hard it is on these guys. But I think knowing who you belong to is so important in jobs like this. And I think sometimes knowing who you belong to means saying, I'm going to step away from this thing that everyone thinks is my identity. I just think he's super brave. And and the fact that he wants to be a high school teacher or history teacher, this is a thing he's talked about before is incredible because it's headed in a completely different direction. I don't know. What do you think, RJ? You're the football guy, right?
Totally. I'll say first off, I've pretty much always hated Andrew Luck because he went to
I'm here for this.
Yeah, he went to Stanford. I went to Berkeley, which is our rival, and then he was drafted number 1 by the Colts, and number 2 was Robert Griffin III, who played for the Redskins, which is my team, and they were always compared to one another, and everyone said Luck was better, even though RG3 won Rookie of the Year that year. So I've never really liked him, but now I love him. I have such a soft spot for him, and there was so much about this whole episode and that Nate Jackson article especially, which set off alarm bells in my head. And the first thing was I listen to economics podcasts sometimes. There's this thing called the sunk cost fallacy, where when you put so many years into a certain endeavor, you can't leave it behind. You have to see it through. And I think about that with Andrew Luck, the amount of that he's probably dedicated 75, 80% of his life to this thing. And it's been everything for him. And he's put so much time and effort and rehab and everything. And it's really hard to walk away. And I don't know, I thought about the Apostle Paul, when he got knocked off his horse, if he thought to himself, well, I'd really like to follow this Jesus guy, but man, I've put a lot of years in blood, sweat, and effort into this whole Jewish thing. Maybe I should just stay the course.
I got for him circumcised. I
got some skin in the game, if you know what I mean. Dave and I, as we've said, worked in youth ministry for a long time, and we would do summer camps for high schoolers and middle schoolers, and we would have college and young adult leaders give testimonies about their Christian faith or their conversion to these younger students. And I was sort of coordinating those testimonies this one week, and there was a young lady, and her testimony was that she'd been really big into horseback riding. Have I told this story before?
I don't
horseback
think so.
riding? Okay. Really big into horseback riding. And then she had come to know Jesus, and because of her faith in Jesus, she had given up her horseback riding. Sort of typical. Sometimes people are I gave up drugs and alcohol. For her, it was I gave up horseback riding. And I sort of thought it didn't feel quite right to me. And I said, is that really true? Is that really what happened? And she sort of took a deep breath and she said, well, not exactly. The truth is that I had been horseback riding at that point for like 10 or 12 years, and it was every weekend and every day, and I was really sick of it. And I was looking for a way out. And coming to faith in Jesus and knowing that I was loved by him no matter what gave me the courage to step out of something that I no longer wanted to do. And I was like, that's the story you need to tell. That's the Andrew Luck story, right? Because I always looked at, I think he has a Catholic, like he has a Christian faith, and I've got to think that in there somewhere, him knowing, like you said, Sarah, that his identity is not a football player, that he is loved, that he is by God in spite of what he does, gave him the courage to step away in spite of the booze and the second guessing and sort of leaving it all behind and turning his back on decades of hard work and preparation. So, I think there's something to be said for that, what does Jesus say? The wind blows wherever it pleases, where it comes from and where it's going, nobody knows. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. And sometimes we are called or freed up to do things that don't make sense in the world's eyes and to leave things behind that we may have spent years and years and years of time and effort and money investing in. And maybe that's what we want to do, actually. And knowing that we're loved by Jesus gives us the freedom to do that. So I don't know. Maybe there's someone out there who needs to leave something behind.
Yeah, gosh, thank you, RJ.
I feel like I need to leave something behind now. I feel like.
Well, that was really for you, Sarah. I'm glad you got the video.
We'll cut it. So yeah, just for me. That was awesome. Seriously.
Thank you. As I've been going around talking about the Seculosity book, people always. The question I get every single time is, what are the other areas of like secular religiosity that you didn't write about or that you could have written about? And most people say sports, is one that I could have, and I actually put it in a footnote that I could have, but I don't know enough about sports to have done it within a real humility. I would have just sort of been sounded, I don't know, like me, like a record store clerk, right? Yeah. Talking about And then this past week when I was in New Jersey, this one clergywoman said. I think actually sports is one way of thinking about it. You can think about it in terms of fandom, because the same thing is the fans who feel entitled to his blood, sweat, and tears, and in fact his physical health. It's the same thing as when a director takes on like a Star Wars franchise, and the people they get death threats for doing things that they shouldn't do, and there's this over-identification, and you have rooted your story in the story that they're actually living or trying to tell, and how just dangerous that is, and how it takes something that's really recreation or storytelling, and it makes it into a total venue of righteousness and self-justification and enoughness and like even bloodletting. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I thought about. And of course, then you have, though, that's not to say that as an athlete, watching like my kids go through, Little League and get it ramping up into travel stuff. I mean, there is this enoughness. There is this sense of like, next year I'll do better. And I kind of wrote about this in terms of swimming recently. I was a swimmer in high school and college, and there was always this idea I was going to have my next season would be the best season. My times were always going to get lower. And then finally, you realize that this is making you miserable, and your times are never going to get, it's sort of a lie. It's almost like a devilish type thing. I'm sure there's some sense in which, going out there trying your hardest and improving is can be gratifying for a young person. But then there's this lie that it's almost like a Tantalus thing where you're always thinking you're gonna finally get to that point where you can be satisfied and retire or stop. And most athletes I know who've walked away, it's been because they've sort of come to this crisis moment where they're like, wait a second, that's never going to happen. And it's the Jerry Seinfeld thing. The wisdom to know when to walk away is unbelievably rare, and that courage, but maybe because of sunk costs and things, I find it to be almost like a God-given thing that someone can say, well, I may not find my enoughness, my righteousness in this thing, but that doesn't mean it won't be given to me somewhere else, or that to focus on your enjoyment of the actual thing rather than what it's doing for your identity it's easier to talk about than to actually execute. RJ, you're about to say something?
I was going to say the best book about exactly what you're talking about from an athlete's perspective is Open by Andre Agassi. And I would encourage actually you, Dave, to read that, and anyone to read that, because his father was so oppressive, and Agassi had such an awful relationship with tennis, which he was so good at, and with himself. And if you know anything about Agassi, he retired and came back about 3 different times. But it was part of his struggle between how can I learn to love this thing which I'm so good at, in spite of all the baggage that I'm bringing. So he would retire or fall to 500 of the world, then come back and be number 1, and retire again and come back. And it's a pretty amazing story. And that book I found to be incredibly insightful, actually. So for what that's worth.
I keep thinking actually about the documentary that's out right now about the amazing Jonathan. Did you guys remember him from like the 90s?
No.
He was a stand-up comedian, magician, so obviously in my wheelhouse. And he was given a death sentence, basically, medically, probably 5 or 6 years ago. They told him he had a year to live because he had a heart condition. It's an incredible documentary because in some ways it's a documentary about making a documentary. But he, at one point, has 3 or 4 different documentaries being made about him at once because he's such a deeply damaged person that he kind of can't say no to the fame, to the attention. And he decides with this horrible, horrible illness, he's also addicted to crystal meth, like as this person who's dying. I mean, it's incredibly painful to watch, but he decides the problem is that he needs to go back to doing magic again. And so you actually watch him like get up on stage and do these tricks that are like the same stuff he did 20 years ago. He like, it reminds me of Andre Agassi. Like he puts on a wig, like a toupee,
Yes.
It's the whole thing. And it's so brutal to watch. But I so recommend that our listeners watch it because I have never seen such a gorgeous portrait of Grace in a film. The way that it ends, we finished it last night, is so arresting and jarring and full of mercy. I can't, I wouldn't want to spoil it for anybody. But anyway, I keep thinking about sort of the opposite of what this looks like, which is, right, that we continue to cling to this identity no matter what, and that we really allow it to destroy us. Or not, I hate to say even allow it, because I think people are so powerless over themselves. But I think it just destroys us ultimately.
Well,
so
we've talked about it, the 3 of us, but one of the big newsworthy things this week is frankly, Dave Chappelle's new comedy special. Quote unquote comedy. It's abrasive.
You will be offended no matter who you are.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use the word brilliant. I think it's that and not, again, as he says in the thing, if you click on his face, you sort of, it's up to you to turn it off if you don't want to watch it.
You knew what you're going to
However, again, because he touches on absolutely every single hot button issue in our culture with a sort of an unexpected, I don't think a predictable take at all, but he's Dave Chappelle, so you know what you're getting into. But he begins by talking. He says like his opening gambit is by saying, "I can't get over Anthony Bourdain committing suicide because that guy had the greatest job that's ever been known to man. He would fly to incredibly cool places and eat incredibly good food with incredibly interesting people, and he then kills himself in a 5-star hotel somewhere." And Sarah, you had written very beautifully about that subject, and I don't want to reduce self-harm to purely circumstantial things, but it is it does stand up at least in the way he delivers it as this incredible parable or illustration of that kind of
Suffering.
emptiness that is cannot really be met with the world's. I mean, it's almost cliched. It's so intense. And then he tells a story of his friend who grew up with nothing and went to an Ivy League school and married this beautiful woman, and then somehow it all fell apart. And he runs into the guy in Foot Locker who's living with his mother at this point, and he's like, but
and he's the manager at Foot Locker, so he's in the ref outfit.
So he's a black guy who's also grown up with nothing, but he's in the ref outfit, and he's like, and yet it never occurred to him to like kill himself. And it's, I mean, it's this anyway. People,
and you feel so terrible for laughing. I just want to say, if you're gonna watch Chappelle, you're gonna feel terrible for laughing the entire time.
But it will operate upon
you. Will be offended and feel ashamed all at once. So enjoy.
We highly recommend it.
And talk about a guy who had to escape for a while under the weight of expectation, right? He went dark for what, a decade?
Yeah, and he would say he sort of died almost. I mean, it's like and there's a fearlessness about the man that is
he's been resurrected.
Intimidated, but also kind of there's a whiff of freedom about it that's almost intoxicating. And there's a moment of grace and practice, by the way, in the epilogue part of it. Going from something abrasive into something the opposite. There was an article on Christianity Today by Sharon Hod Miller called "Why Niceness Weakens Our Witness," and she writes, "Niceness is a form of superficial kindness that's used as a means to a selfish end. I identify it as an idol in my life because I have served it tirelessly, and it has served me well in return. My devotion to it has won me a lot of acceptance and praise, but it has also inhibited my courage, fed my self-righteousness, encouraged my inauthenticity, and produced in me a flimsy sweetness that easily gives way to disdain. I see the same phenomenon everywhere. Niceness has become a social currency in our culture, one that we value highly without ever realizing it. We will forgive all manner of ills in a person we deem to be nice. We use niceness to grease the wheels of our social interactions. We employ it like a ladder, helping us to scale the heights of our career. Niceness is concerned with the appearance of goodness and not the reality of it. In addition to being a false virtue, niceness radically diminishes Christian witness. Author Randy Alcorn describes it this way: "We've been schooled that it's inappropriate to say anything negative. Being a good witness once meant faithfully representing Christ, even when it meant being unpopular. Now it means making people like us. We've redefined Christ-like to mean nice. The solution," she writes, however, is not to trade in our appearance of niceness for an appearance of boldness. We have to go deeper into Christ. Jesus was loving, he was gracious, he was forgiving, he was kind, but he was not nice. He was a man who would leave the 99 sheep to rescue the one, but he was also totally unafraid of offending people. Lots to say about this, but I was very curious in what you, RJ, I consider you to be a very nice person. Sarah, you have a lot of wonderful virtues.
I was like, is he gonna lie?
Sarah, you are incredibly insightful.
Honest.
Bold.
No, where did you guys land on this? Because people, there is something about the Flanders idea from The Simpsons that being a Christian is sort of a wet noodle and just being super nice all the time, and yet
who also is constantly vindicated in that show. Let it be said.
Let it be said.
Yeah.
Let it be said. But niceness versus goodness. I don't know. Where do you guys? What do you think about this?
I had a tough time with this article. And I did. And I felt like it skewered me a little bit. Like, am I too nice? Do I care too much about what other people think about me? But I then thought about sort of where that comes from. And I wasn't always nice. We've talked before about my high school days when I from time to time would wear a beret to school and often wore a 3-inch wooden cross around my neck and would read the New York Times during lunch in the cafeteria and was happy to speak the truth in love to anyone who was willing to hear it.
No one. Right.
Amazingly, it didn't work out that well. And I remember talking to a girl once who I kind of liked. She might have dated me if I had been nice to her, but I wasn't nice to her. But then she ended up dating another guy who, I didn't think very highly of in my infinite wisdom. And at some point, she just said something like, he's just such a nice guy. He's such a nice guy. And I realized I was not a nice guy, but I kind of wanted to be a nice guy. And so in college, I decided to try being a nice guy. And guess what? It worked. And there's something to be said for being nice. And I don't mean like saccharine sweet, like roll over all the time, but maybe being nice it does sort of create the space for love, and someone might actually tell you what's going on in their life, if you're nice. Whereas if they think you're just going to speak the truth to them or judge them, or they're not going to tell you anything. And guess what? Like, I'm not Jesus. Like, I don't know what's going on with people. I can't see behind the mask. I have limited wisdom. And so I think there's something to be said for being nice in the name of knowing that Jesus isn't always nice. And I don't think you always need to be nice, like as if as a pastor or whatever, from the pulpit. You can sort of speak some hard truths as long as it's kind of backed up by grace. And I have no problem offending with the gospel, offend with nothing but the gospel. But I'd rather not just be me that's offending, because that doesn't really accomplish anything. So I don't know, man. I had a tough time with this article.
I think, and I say this carefully to you because this is like a word that people, I don't know, tend to feminize, but I don't actually think of you as nice. I think of you as gentle.
Oh,
which is different.
I like that.
And having worked with you before, I definitely would like spitball stuff with you just because you would have this like very gentle response, or you just laugh at me. And in either instance, it was like very helpful. But I agree with you in that I don't know. I do get a little anxious whenever people are like, this is what Jesus was like, so we should be that. And I'm like, well, is there a cross out back you're going to crawl up on and we're all going to like stand around it and watch what happens? Like,
and spit on you.
How's the ending of this going for you? Yeah, so for me, because I'm not a nice person, I can't like fake it. I mean, I just wasn't raised to be nice. Like I remember, and which is weird because 99% of the young women in Mississippi are definitely raised to be nice. But like we had this family friend, and every time her daughter would like go anywhere, as she's walking out, she'd be like this. Hold on, let me just muster this. She'd go, "Be nice, Leanne." And like that's like that was like a thing that like my mom was like, we're never gonna say that to you. Like it was like a very like that's not what we do in this family. And so like yeah, I'm not nice. Like that's never occurred to me to be nice. However, when I'm around people like RJ and Dave, you embody some of this, and frankly, it's a thing. I've told Dave this, but it's a thing in Mockingbird that's really shaped me in a different way. Where when people get upset by what I say or who I am even, there's a way in Mockingbird I've just learned, and frankly, I think this like goes all the way to Paul Zoll, where you're just kind of like, the word is not relent, but the word is to be gentle in that moment. Like to not come back at somebody with like aggression, but to come back at somebody in a really open-hearted way and say, I hear you and I'm with you and I get that this may not make sense for you and like, where are you with this? And, you know, I think to say that is being nice is to really minimize what actually is in some ways, maybe in some ways a Christ-like posture, but I actually think just in more ways is like the posture of someone who follows Christ, right? So
yeah.
I
mean, the distinction that she's making a lot of times in here, I think, is between niceness and kindness. And I think that the mistake would be to say, well, kindness never looks like niceness, or niceness never looks like kindness, or I mean, actually more the former, that kindness never looks like niceness, because any opportunity I think people can find to justify their own controlling, slightly asshole-ish tendencies and tell other people what they really think of them or what they should do or judge them. I mean, and that's what you sort of, if niceness is a buffer against sort of just being a judgmental so-and-so, then I think that I don't want to attack niceness, because I think it's, better. I'd rather be around people that are nice than people who are mean. Sarah, I don't actually. By the way,
there's no surplus of niceness in our culture.
I mean, that's the other
never
thing.
do I think of you as a mean person. So,
I am. I appreciate that, but I mean, the other thing it makes me think of is that gentleness, maybe kindness, although I get it, that word's very hip right now. Like you can't find a t-shirt for a kid that doesn't seem to have like be kind written on it. But I think that maybe the other word I think of is like sacrificial, right? Which is also kind of a posture I've learned from Mockingbird. But I had told you guys this, but our son broke his arm, and so that means that he can't, and he's a third grade boy, he can't go outside on the playground, which is like brutal for him. And he has this friend who has given up recess every single day since school started, every single day. And he sits with Neil in the nurse's office because they were too loud for the library, and they play board games together. And for me, that is so far beyond nice. Like it's this kid is giving up to be with my kid. And I think that's gentleness is like this word that we think of as gentle. And it's actually like a super powerful, aggressive word in some ways, right? Because it is gentleness is the feeling we get. I think it's the feeling I get when I know I should receive judgment and instead I get a hug. You know what I mean? Like it's that kind of that contrast we get in scripture from Jesus that's just so jarring. It's like, Neil broke his arm. He should like have, should just sit there and like read by himself. Like that's what should happen. You know what I mean? Like that's the protocol. But like he's got this kid who's willing to like give up his recess, and he's got this teacher who's willing to let these two like zoo animals hang out together in the nurse's office, and like none of it is really quote unquote deserved, right? And that's why it's so incredible.
I think sacrificial is a good word too, Sarah, because what I often see you do is say things that may not be popular but are true and kind of need to be said, and you're willing to take the hits to say them. Which
That's sacrificial.
Yeah, it's sacrificial. Yeah, and then I don't know. I wonder if that other little boy,
but yeah,
that other little boy just likes your son and would rather be playing board games with your son.
It's true,
than
though.
outside getting hit in the head with a kickball.
Yeah, no, it's it's totally
or
true.
whatever it is.
Like they sit there and play bananagrams. They're like in nerdy boy heaven. It's my favorite.
It's
there you go.
There's definitely a trend in certain Christian circles to like laud all these virtues, and that becomes like we cultivate virtue. Rather, that's sort of a euphemism for we follow all these laws. I mean, it becomes a new legalism. I think as much as it's got this incredible tradition of people talking about virtue and the cultivation of them, but and niceness and kindness as well is almost always something I think we try to cultivate in ourselves, and therefore it can be kind is an incredible law. There's a sign again in our right near us, a huge sign that a church has erected, and it says do no harm in all caps, and then it says do good. And then it says, love God. And I was like, okay, so don't do anything bad. Then, actually do
Never leave
things
your
that
house.
are good.
Are you dead?
And then it's like, actually love God. And I was like, okay, well, there you go. That's the law. That's why I need to go into church rather than not that'll keep me away. But I was thinking about how Will McDavid wrote something about this a couple of years ago. And he said that in the Christian tradition, actually, there are three virtues that are sort of take pride of place among all others. And that's faith, hope, and love. And he writes, they have an object, and perhaps they acquire them from that object, meaning God, rather than from practice. All three, faith, hope, and love, look to God. Courage and temperance and even kindness stand on their own, but faith is always faith in. Hope is hope in. Love is love of. They take us outside ourselves, thank God. And what is their source? Faith is a natural response when someone proves herself trustworthy and reliable. Hope is hope in a reliable promise. And love both reaches out toward what is lovely and naturally reciprocates when someone first loves us. So we thank God that our faith, hope, and love, the actual virtues that really count, come not from ourselves, nor our disciplines, our practices, our actions, or habits, but they come from the one who elicits them. That real virtue is something that comes from God. And I think that Unfortunately, when we get into even talking about niceness versus kindness, as interesting as it is, it boils down to okay, well, kindness is what we're after, so therefore be kind. Damn it, it's.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say one more thing. I think as a mom, one thing I've learned, and there's some really interesting psychological data that backs this up, is that we can't make our children kind. We can't make our children nice. What we can do that's very powerful, and I remember reading a lot about this around Harvey, is say to our children, because there's this idea we have that our kids will learn to be nice or kind because we tell them, but actually what has to happen is someone has to sort of give them those virtues. Like, in other words, like my son's friend has to say, hey, I'm going to give up recess and hang out with you every day. And then we have to say, this was like such a kind thing. He just like, did, what an amazing thing he did for you. And that's actually the only way. I mean, there's real data that backs this up, that kids understand how to be kind, as if you've said, oh my gosh, someone's given all this up for you. And then they're able to say, oh, I can do that. And it's such a reflection of the gospel. Like, it's like so linked to what Jesus has done, because it's like, if you tell me to be nice, I'm like, take a hike. You know what I mean? Like, you be nice, Leanne. But like, if you tell me, right, that Jesus has gone all the way for me, has loved me regardless of how nice or not nice I am, that emits a very different feeling. I mean, that makes me want to meet people with gentleness and openness and sometimes sacrifice, right? Because it's just a completely different place to start.
That reminds me, you sent that viral picture of the little boy in the first day of school holding his friend's hand who was overwhelmed because he's autistic, and it was beautiful. But I gotta say, the interview that the news lady did with the two little boys made me a little uncomfortable. But as you were talking, it was also very revealing, because the little boy who received the kindness could not stop talking about it. The little boy who had enacted the kindness didn't know what to say about it.
Yeah,
he had nothing to say. He just did it. And clearly because he had kind parents, or he had experienced some kindness. So there was something. There was just a movement of the Holy Spirit that said, I need to hold my friend's hand right now. So it was a little bit like, Jesus, do not let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. And this little boy just did it spontaneously and wonderfully. And I was like, news lady, why do you got to make him talk about it?
The Holy Ghost does not make for a good interview.
You're going to ruin it, like, man.
Well, that sounds like a good enough place for us to end then. We're going to ruin it. We're going to ruin it by talking about it. I'm grateful for you two. Thank you for being kind to me, to be honest.
Thanks, Dave.
And we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.